Hello, 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 and welcome back. Thank you so much for joining me here today. Today, we are going to be talking about self-efficacy and self-advocacy. And we're also going to discuss the importance of students having a sense of belonging in their educational environment. My guest today is Ashley Harding. She is a passionate fourth generation educator, founder of North Star Academics, and a member of the ChildNEXUS community.
Millions of kids struggle with learning, processing, and social emotional difficulties. These challenges interfere with their ability to reach their full potential. Dr. Karen Wilson is here to help. Her extensive background in pediatric neuropsychology and higher education have prepared her for this unique mission. Listen as she delivers content to inform, educate, and empower parents and educators. This will enable you to identify challenges that kids face and get them on the road to achieving their full potential. This is Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by ChildNEXUS.
Hi, Ashley.
Hi, Karen. How are you?
I'm great. I'm so glad you are here. I've been looking forward to this for weeks now. I feel like we've had it on the calendar for weeks, and I'm so glad that you are here and that we're going to be able to have this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you so much for having me. I'm so excited. I've been listening to your podcast, and I'm honored to be here.
Well, I'm so glad to have you and North Star Academics as part of the ChildNEXUS community. There are so many things that we could discuss because you are involved in supporting students in so many different ways, which probably means you're going to have to come back and talk about something completely different at some point. But one thing that stood out to me when we spoke, I think we were at the CAPLA luncheon, and we got into this conversation about the idea of self-efficacy and self-advocacy, which we will discuss today. But it begins with really ensuring that students feel seen, they feel heard, and they feel valued, particularly when they're struggling. I'd love to kind of start there with, how do you do that? Because it seems that you do that very, very well.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes. So North Star is actually founded on three principles: academic mastery, student locus of control, meaning self-advocacy, self-efficacy, and parent engagement. And what we foundationally believe in, and what I've seen over my career, is that students, in order to thrive, need a place in which we belong. And belonging for me is grounded in Dr. Bettina Love's definition of mattering. It's knowing that you hold a significant space somewhere, that you are thought of, that you are considered in the culture and the content and the curriculum and the policies of that space. And so I don't like to distill belonging and mattering as being two separate things, because I think that speaks to the experience of students and families. And when I talk to my families, I always joke around and say, I rarely get called when things are excelling. I'm not the first call I'm not that first call that's like, we're thriving and how do we enhance? It's usually a call of, we like it here, or we're doing well enough, but there's a disconnect. And traditionally, I find that disconnect, whether it starts or it's symptomatic of an academic mastery concern, comes down to a feeling of somebody doesn't feel as though they matter, that they hold a place, that their presence in that environment is significant enough for long-lasting change or deep impact to be made.
And that is such an important piece, and a piece that is frequently overlooked, because, I interact with a lot of educators, a lot of parents, and oftentimes the focus is, yes, we want them to develop these social emotional skills, but yes, we also want them to achieve and be high achieving and to do the best they can do. But the sense of belonging, the sense that you matter, really resonates with me, because if that is true and students feel that, then the learning experience completely changes, and the safety that they feel in their learning environment changes as well.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So often, and I can speak to meetings I've been in with schools across the country. Just last week, I was in a call with a wonderful private school in Texas, with a family that I've been with for 6 years. I've worked with 4 of their children. I go to their grandma's house for the holidays. So we're in this together. And when I think about it, the conversation was grounded in policies and structures and procedures. And not once did the administration talk about their knowledge of the student. And that for me was that big gap of, you're not creating a space even for me and that family to feel as though we belong to you, that our presence here and the condition in which this child's being educated matters. We're now talking about performative measures of accountability. We were talking about attendance rates. She's not missed much class, but we were talking about things that were measurable and not so much the quality of the educational experience. And that's something that's huge for me to ground parents in when we talk about advocacy. How do you feel connected to the school? Because I'm often reminded that our students, our wonderful children, they're ecosystems of their own. And so when they come to a school, they come as these living, breathing organisms that have families and community and culture and friends well outside of the scope of their 8 a.m. to 3 p.m. environment. And if that's not bridged, if there's a gap between those two, academically speaking, we've already fostered a schism that's only going to grow if this student can't be completely autonomous and navigate these school systems alone.
Absolutely. And these children bring with them, again, all of those experiences, all aspects of who they are into their learning environment. And there shouldn't be a disconnect. They should be allowed to be themselves and to bring that part of themselves to the classroom and have that be something that is accepted and, taken into consideration when they are learning.
Absolutely. We foster a deep-seated relationship with all of our school partners, really looking at what is that condition of relationship between school to home as it relates to academic mastery. One of the first things that I do whenever we take on a new student or we partner with a new school is we start to look at what's the existing relationship, how often are parents coming in, what's the communication between teachers and family? How are families getting information? One big thing is if you're only communicating with a family when things go wrong or there's a concern, I promise you don't have a relationship with that family.
Yes. And I think that, that relationship between the family and the school is essential to making sure that, again, your child's needs are being met. Right? Making sure that they are attending to your child's overall well-being, not just how they are performing. You talked about performance, how they are performing academically, because children are so much more than the grades that they get in school and how well they perform different academic tasks or how well they behave in the classroom. They're so much more than that. And what I'm hearing from you is the importance of prioritizing creating these safe spaces and fostering a culture of belonging for children. How do you believe we can do that?
I think it starts with our own internal framing and systems. So when I'm working with a school, I have a 5-part framework. First being, and I call it anti-bias and inclusivity. We have to start with our own internal biases. And that speaks to everyone. I think so often, particularly after 2020, we have leveraged this stigma that if you had the same cultural affinity as a student or family, you are anti-bias and you will relate to them completely. Well, bias is well beyond culture. It's well beyond race. We all have to do that internal work to find out who we are and what we believe the potential of any student can be. I think that's the job of any educator. The next is we have to think about the way in which we communicate. And I spoke to that earlier. So often I've worked in cases and I've worked in partnership with schools and families where the only communication is to report out concerns. That is not communication. That is delegating the concern that happens at school back home. And for most families, they're not professional educators and they are deferential to what the school says is best. The next is considering equity, particularly when I'm talking about my neurodivergent students, when I'm talking about my students who are new and their families are new to the private and independent school space. There's a shorthand of communication that I think we all know to speak in these environments. But if this is your first time, you don't have that language, that lexicon, that that vocabulary, even of how you can communicate with your child's teacher and the norms and the customs is very different. And I think we need to give a lot more grace and a lot more tools to families as they're navigating their first time in these communities. Engagement is huge. How are we welcoming and continuing to foster long-term successful relationships, not just with families, but with their communities of support? So often our students will have large communities that are super, super influential to them and to their success in these spaces, but will only engage with families at certain pivotal points. Back to schools, welcome nights, parent-teacher conferences, when I worked in schools, donuts with dads, things like that. Those aren't the only silos in which we should have our families engaged. They are a critical part of this learning process as well as the developmental process. And then the last piece is the learning. How are we evaluating the systems? How are we evaluating our internal processes? Not once every few years for an audit, and certainly not just once a year at the end of a school year term, but at various milestones for that student. Are we all learning what this child needs, what this family requires in order to have a continuum of success? One thing that North Star, and I always talk to families, I tell them, when I think of a matriculation plan, I don't start with what next year is. We already know how next year is going to go. I've already worked with on that. I'm working with your administrators to what's the continuation plan or continuum plan through high school, because that's the promise that parents are counting on. If my child is admitted at 7th grade, I'm assuming that you have a plan for that child through to and through college. And so that's the lens that we also focus on as well. So that critical learning piece is how are we continuing to reframe and restructure so that this child and family is constantly feeling connected, belonging, and that they have a sense of community here so that they can fulfill on the bigger promise.
Right. And really what you're bringing attention to is this gap that exists in many educational environments in really catering to the diverse student needs and the importance of engagement. And again, that feeling of connection, that feeling of belonging, and how those factors influence overall success of students in their academic environment and beyond. Because eventually they're going to matriculate out of that academic environment. We want them to be carrying those strengths and things that they've learned to the next space for them.
Absolutely. And particularly if you are coming out of an independent or private school space where you've gone through the rigorous application process, your family has invested, be it financially or with their own time, traditionally both. This for me is a social justice issue because I know while we do have schools that are highly diverse, for many families, having one child or both of your children attend these schools, you're looking at it as a shift for them to have a trajectory in a future that may not have been guaranteed somewhere else. And so to know that your child is getting not just the academic support and mastery, but they're getting those executive functioning skills, they're getting those 21st century skills, they're developing social emotional wonderful tools and coping systems and coping methods. But most importantly, they're developing a strong sense of self. They're developing an identity. They are able to really value who they are in a larger world and in a diverse world. That's what I think parents are seeking out. And so often schools, I think, recognize and do their best to adhere to and to meet those expectations. But it's really difficult for one institution to say we can do all of that without having the support from expert practitioners like yourself, work that we do with North Star, and then just community stakeholders who can come in and say, let us support you as your school and your school body continues to change, because you've got to be responsive to the needs of the student constantly.
Right. So we want our educators, we want our stakeholders to really be in tune to the needs of the students, but the student also has to know what they need. And, oftentimes, we're working with, I work, and a lot of the individuals in our community, professionals in our community, work with kids who are neurodivergent, who learn and think differently. They have unique needs. And when they're in academic environments, and they are struggling, it's often hard for them to ask for what it is that they need. And many, and I think we've talked about this, don't even know kind of what their learning profile is, right? They don't know what their learning profile is. They don't understand why they need the support that they do. And really what we want is by the time they're in high school, earlier would even be better. And definitely by the time they get to college, they're able to describe their struggles, describe their strengths, understand their talents and their gifts, understand their learning profile, and be able to ask for what it is that they need in order to be successful.
Yes. For the listeners, you cannot see, but I'm snapping.
You're snapping.
In every meeting, I am known for snapping fingers. I learned that in the classroom. Everything you said times 100, because it is that level of advocacy that we know for our students. And I speak to neurodivergent students, but I also speak to students who identify as BIPOC. Those level of advocacy and mastery skills are what we're going to have to foster to ensure that you do have a choice-filled future. And so when I look at my students and I think about what are their needs, academic mastery is usually the easiest to address. Because if you are a professional educator, and we do hire master level teachers, we know that we can get you into the framework of being a successful student in the classroom. What I have to remind people on both sides, both parents and educators, is that for many families, the deference that they have and they give to the school, whether it is warranted or even requested by the school, is cultural. I read an article in the Atlantic years ago, not too long ago, but it said 30% of Black families are deferential to their school teacher, whether or not they trust that person. And that was just because of the cultural frameworks we come from, where you don't push back on leadership. You don't want to have punitive measures if you are an outspoken parent. You want to ensure that your child has a sense of belonging and at least has a relationship with that teacher. So many times we'll pull back even when we want to be the best advocates for our kids, because we just have an innate belief that this other person is trained, they have a professional background in this, and that they hold the power in this space. And so to distill that for a family means that we have to teach it to the child, because the child is not absorbing new skills by osmosis. They are only modeling what has been modeled for them. And so we spend a lot of time, and I spend a great deal of time in our curriculum and in our workshops, really spending that effort and tending to the needs of the child to get them to be a communicator to their teacher, to get them to meet. Even I've got high school students who feel uncomfortable even meeting with a teacher at lunch or after school for support because they don't have that relationship and they don't know how to articulate without feeling ostracized or othered that they need the additional support. So I think that that's the crux, is that when we can get a student to feel as though they are the master of their own future, that they've got the locus of control to say, not only do I know my needs, I know how to articulate them, I know the proper language, and I know what it feels like to be successful, then we have a student that is truly fulfilled in that environment.
So many things that you said are so important. And we could dig deep into all of them. One of them that is standing out to me right now is that deference piece, because I think when parents have this deference to teachers, it can sometimes keep them, and often keeps them, from asking for what it is that their children need. And I love that you made a point about parents having to model that advocacy for their kids, because kids will do what they see. And it is a cultural thing, because you don't want to push back with the school, because there is a belief. Some parents will believe that if I do that, then they're going to treat my child differently, right? There's going to be some pushback and it's going to negatively impact my child. And they don't want that. They don't want to rustle any feathers. They don't want that for their child. And that can actually keep their child from getting the support that they need. And so it sounds like it's not only teaching self-advocacy skills to the student, but also helping the parents navigate those relationships with teachers, particularly like you were saying that some schools only have specific opportunities for parents to engage with teachers, whether it's an open house, or a family pizza night or whatever that event might be. But I often tell parents, you can ask for more time. You can request meetings at any time. And that helps you to develop that relationship and helps and gives you the opportunity to have teachers know your child and know your family.
Yes. All of that is critical to the success of your child at that school. I've had a couple examples just come to mind. I spent about 2 hours on a call with a parent a week ago who just needed language and framing to send an email to her child's teacher. She had asked for meetings. She had met with people and felt as though the questions and concerns she had were never fully addressed. She was given guidance of how to follow up. But because she was so fearful that this would become, as she put it, and we all know what this means, a thing, she wanted to ensure every word was perfect, that she wasn't too forceful, but that she was communicative and clear. And at the end of the message, I just told her, and obviously we discussed a few other concerns, at this juncture, if it's bringing this much angst to you, I want you to understand that means that you have to evaluate whether it's the right placement. And that's the other piece that I like to tell parents. So often we are excited and just so I share, I come from the charter school space. So I remember school lotteries. You want to talk about parent excitement when you have to go through a lottery process and waiting months, and it has nothing to do with an application. It is just if your number is pulled. That level of anticipation and then fear really does create a culture of lack of pushback, lack of advocacy, because you've won literally the lottery. And so having that background and being a director of parent engagement in that space, I've come to this work to remind parents that you are not waiting to be empowered. You actually hold the power and you work in collaboration with your child's teacher in school to ensure that they have the best educational process. But if you can't be empowered in that space, you have to evaluate, is that space really what's best for you, your child, and your family? Because this is a long journey. This is 12 years. And if we start at the onset of fearing retribution, fearing lack of support, fearing a space in which we as individuals and adults can communicate our needs, we know that our children won't have that opportunity.
Yes. And I'm really glad that you mentioned that because, again, we want parents to have a sense of agency, right? In their children as well, over their own futures and what that looks like. And again, we talked about the sense of belonging, of the sense that you matter, and also a feeling of safety, feeling safe enough with the school that your child is attending, with the school that you're in, to be able to have those hard conversations, feel safe enough to express your thoughts, express your concerns, and express the fact that you may not be getting what it is that you need and that you need more. You need more time, right? You need more support. You need more engagement. You need something different than what it is that you're getting. And like you're saying, sometimes what it is that you need, you will not be able to get in the academic environment that your child is in. And that's hard for parents to come to that realization.
That's extremely hard. And it's extremely hard for parents who've had multiple children in certain schools or certain organizations, because you have to reframe what the expectation is and decide whether or not the needs of that individual child is as critical as, and I say this respectfully, sometimes the name and reputation of the school that you're involved with. I've been working with a family now, and the mother said, this school won't fulfill the accommodations my child needs. So I asked them to remove it from the neuropsych because I knew we weren't going to get it. And I said, first off, no, we're not removing anything from the evaluation. And I said, let's have a further conversation about what value you are getting. Because if you aren't going to get the academic accommodations that are required for your child to be most successful, what is it that they are getting? because that is something that families have to consider. Is it the socialization? Is it that they are in a peer group that makes them feel a sense of belonging? Is it that your whole family's gone through this academic environment and that's a critical core value for you? And none of those are wrong, but I think those are things that we don't always give ourselves as individuals, as adults, and parents to say, why am I making this choice for this child? Was I that excited that they got the opportunity that we're going to make it work? Or have I thought about, is this really the best space for my child at this time and for our family?
Absolutely. And, parents need to develop those skills, like I'm saying, and like we've been saying, to be able to come to the realization and to evaluate whether or not this place is where their child should be. And oftentimes they just feel so invested because they've gone through that application process. They finally got into the school where they think that their child should go and will thrive. And it's hard to then realize that it's not all that I thought it would be. But that's where that self-reflection piece is so important. And it's also having those skills to be able to kind of analyze the situation and to kind of look at your child and step back from what the perceived expectation was to where your child is and what your child needs. And strategies for self-advocacy and building those self-advocacy skills for your child are also important for the parent, which is what we've kind of been talking about. I would love for you to kind of share strategies and initiatives that you use to support families, because it's not just the child, families in developing their advocacy and self-advocacy skills.
Absolutely. The first thing I start with in every meeting is an aspirational questionnaire. And usually we do it over the phone or on Zoom, but I like to get grounded in what is the future goal. I'm always future set for our families. And I want them to articulate that this, like I said before, is a long-term process. So what does it look like for your child to be successful, not just this year, but 5 years from now and at graduation? And from there, we get to distill, well, then what is the environment that it's going to take for your child to be successful? And I look at that from the lens of academically, social, emotionally, and then from a sense of what is community building for them. I then ask them to evaluate, if they're a new family, has there been any evidence that the school you're in is providing that for you? If they're a family that's been with the school for a while, what is the historical evidence that you're getting those types of supports? Very rarely have I met families that say they get 2 out of the 3. And usually academic support is the first primary concern, but usually there's a concern somewhere around, well, we don't have the relationships. My student or my child may not feel as connected to their peers or their teacher. So then we go into the conversation of, well, how often are we meeting with our school? Very rarely have my families, before working together, met with their school more than once a year. And usually it's at a critical academic concern point. So we start talking about who are the stakeholders in which you need to engage with that I need to know in order to support them. So we really do a landscape evaluation of, do you have relationships with teachers? Do you know your child's dean if they're an older student? Do you understand who the stakeholders are and who the leadership members are within your school and what role they play within the school to support your child? Many times my families don't know the difference between the dean of students and your child's academic dean, and how those are 2 very different roles, and yet they have a huge influence on your child's experience. So once we become educated to who's in the school, that's when we begin meeting with people. And so we go into those meetings highly prepared of what are our aspirational goals for the year, what responsibility I hold as a practitioner in the work, as a therapist, what we're committed to doing on our end and what I'm committed to doing as a partner with the family, and then what our requests are for the school. And I always tell families, these are not adversarial conversations. These are the beginning of collaborative conversations. So we're not going in with attack of who did what or said. That's moot at this point. Now we're in repair and really relationship building mode. And that's always been a successful avenue and opportunity for, I think, schools to share their frustrations. Because I will say this, I've never worked with a school partner. Never is a strong word. Rarely have I worked with a school partner that isn't primed and prepared to meet the family at least halfway once they know what it is that's not working. Because so often schools are focused, like I said, on that academic mastery piece. They don't always see themselves as being co-collaborators and creating a space of belonging and mattering outside of the classroom because they think of that as the partnership or the ownership of the family. And so a lot of times we're just coming in to become realigned. And then from there, as you can imagine, I go into the meeting of, well, here are our next milestone steps. Here's how we'll know we're successful. Here's when we should meet again to ensure that we're actually pushing and moving to our trajectory from survival to thriving. And then here is how we're going to map out, or here's how we can map out future success. And for me, that comes down to classroom placement, class placement, support placement. Are the accommodations fulfilling the full need of the student? Are parents engaged and welcomed into the school beyond academic concerns? And how are we as a team going to wrap our whole minds and our whole efforts around ensuring that this student knows that their family, their ed therapist, and their school are in collaboration? Once my student knows, hey, your mom has met with this person on campus, I see a shift just in my student. They start to feel as though, great, now I've got not only one, but two stakeholders here on campus, my parents and an advisor or an adult. And the research shows if a child has one person, not just a parent, just one person invested in them, they are more likely to be successful in school, to go to college, and to have more healthy relationships throughout their adult life.
And that's what parents need to know. That's what parents need to know. That's what educators need to know. And I feel, Ashley, we've been talking a lot about modeling. You stepping into that classroom and being in that meeting, you are helping to model for parents those advocacy skills. And then they are able to, in turn, model those advocacy skills for their children. What you're saying is that the sense of belonging, a sense of feeling connected to your academic, environment, including their teachers and your peers, a feeling of safety, a feeling that your educational needs are being met, but you're also getting the support that you need in order to demonstrate what it is that you know and achieve your full potential. And all of those things impact long-term outcomes. And you talked about aspirations, and that it is so important for parents, for educators, for other stakeholders to foster that and to really value mattering, to value a sense of belonging, because that is what is going to help students to thrive and to reach their full potential. It's not just the academic mastery. It's all of these other pieces that are sometimes, and in some situations, often and frequently overlooked.
That's the key. And I want to really hone it in on the value and the importance and impact of stakeholders. When we talk about safe spaces, I've done more school site visits than I can think of in California and outside of California. And so often when I talk to people and they'll say, oh, well, this is our space for a learning specialist program or our safe space for affinity groups, they think of physical space. And I'm always looking for who is that critical adult that is a safe person for our students. Who is that person that will build and develop a relationship with our students so that when you do have a child who needs an advocate in real time, and sometimes I kid you not, I probably 4 days out of the week wake up to text messages from students of, okay, so my Spanish teacher said this, or this person said this, and I'm giving language and I'm calling people at break time to make sure everything's okay. But I've always had a joy when my students will say, oh, no, I talked to Miss such and such, or my coach said this, or somebody came with me to that meeting. I like to remind schools that those leaders in their building, whomever they are, coaches, teachers, advisors, they too create a sense of safety within the student. And that's what we're trying to develop, is a safe space within myself to know that my needs are valued, that how I feel is appropriate to feel, that I can advocate for myself because I know the language I need to use, And if nothing else, I'm not alone. I'm not fighting this. I'm not having this concern isolated within myself. Somebody else sees me. Someone else knows that I matter, and somebody else is with me to go through this journey.
Absolutely. Ashley, I cannot thank you enough for all the work that you do to support students, to support families, and to really help educators realize how they can create these thriving and inclusive academic environments for their students and for their communities. If our listeners, and I know I shouldn't even say if, when our listeners are looking feverishly to reach out to you because they want to learn more about self-efficacy and self-advocacy and building those skills and collaborating with schools, they want to learn more about you and about North Star Academics, what is the best way for them to reach you?
Absolutely. So the best way to find us is online, northstaracademics.org. You can also email me at info@northstaracademics.org. We're also on Instagram and Facebook at North Star Academics. And then you can also find us you can find me on LinkedIn, Ashley Harding, under North Star Academics.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Thank you again. You're supporting students, but you are changing lives. And thank you so much for all that you do.
Thank you. Thank you, Karen, for having me. This has been wonderful. Thank you for letting me share.
Thanks again for joining us for this conversation. To learn more about Ashley and North Star Academics, be sure to check out the show notes. We will see you next time.
Thanks for listening to Diverse Thinking, Different Learning by ChildNEXUS. For more resources, visit us online at childnexus.com.